of a process. So not to worry. All questions and comments are welcome and appreciated. We just ask that everybody be kind to each other, be respectful. Don't say anything that you wouldn't want said. Since I'm standing here, I'm going to look at my clients in the audience and say, any problem if I read the diversity statement? Good, gentlemen? All right. The Montechusett Regional Planning Council Commission, MRPC, operates its programs, services, and activities in compliance with federal non-discrimination laws, including Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VI, the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987, and related statutes and regulations. Title VI prohibits discrimination in federally assisted programs and requires that no person in the United States of America shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, including limited English proficiency, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be otherwise subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal assistance, as tonight's program is in fact a case, which Bruce will tell you about in just a moment. If you have any questions or concerns about that, you can absolutely visit that website down there, but we just wanted to make it very clear that that is something that is important to all of us here tonight. Whoop. Yeah, it's very interesting that it did that. So now, these are tonight's speakers. You've already heard from Brian Doherty. You heard a little bit from Bruce Kaplan. You've heard a lot from me already. You will also be hearing from two of our other consultants who will be joining us at the podium later in the presentation, Han Bao and Zach Gavel. With that, would you like it back or shall I keep going?
You should keep going because following this, there's two more little
very good
that I think you
excellent. So we've kind of covered a bit of this. So we've been through, I think, the introductions. We will then go through some definitions, talk about what is Safe Streets and Roads for All, a little bit about what is this Vision Zero thing that you may have heard about. Then we're going to talk about what we've learned from all of you. And, Brian mentioned his appreciation for those of you who took this survey. We had quite good participation in the survey. We had a lot of people who looked at it, and for the number of people who looked at it, we had quite a few people who clicked all the way through it. And then we'll also hear about what our engineering folks have learned by sifting through a great deal of data. We'll talk about what do these findings suggest to us, think about where does that kind of all leave us for next steps, and I think we will have plenty of time for Q&A. So this slide that you see with 50, count them, 50 locations all across the MRPC and MART bonus community region, which is what this study comprises. These are places that WSP CPI, which is Communications and Public Involvement staff, visited, either to drop off a stack of flyers discussing this project, or to have a staffed table where they actually took a minute to speak with people, depending on what the sort of traffic at that location was. My colleague, Grant Olier, who's here with me tonight, as I mentioned, assisting and facilitating with the chat, was quite the road warrior. I think he went to at least 44 of these himself, potentially more. Certainly don't expect folks to try and read all of those, but the point is in showing you this graphic that we made a very good faith effort to try and get into every community in the study area, to put our literature out there, to get in touch with people and really say, hey, we want you to participate, we want you involved, we want your input. One of the things that is our intention to do is at the end of this process, there's a public comment period, and we will be revisiting these locations to again tell people, hey, we'd really like your input. Ahead of this meeting, these are the places where we advertised. Again, not going to read through all of these. I will note that we were in Vocero Hispano in Spanish, and you can see here that we've had both print and digital editions. More to the point in just showing you all of these is that the idea behind this has been, if you go to the fireworks show on the 4th of July, and there's that sort of steady boom, 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 boom. The idea behind this is to have had a steady drumbeat all through the month of May, alerting people to this meeting, telling folks that this is coming. You know, we did all that flyering. That was to kind of get people primed to take the survey, to know that this was coming, understand, you know, what was ahead. And then we also want to thank the public access cable channels and a number of our partner communities that have been carrying the advertisements beginning from the week of the 13th of May. So a big thank you there. And then also do want to thank the sort of signal boosting from some of our partners. So Fitchburg State University, who has graciously agreed to host us tonight in what is a very lovely room. MART, your area transit agency, which did yeoman service getting this information out. The municipal government of the 23 member communities and the 5 MART service communities. And then the members of our Vision Zero Action Committee. I believe at least one of them has joined us tonight, and we thank her in pushing the information about that. And with that, I'm going to bring back Bruce. Thank you, sir.
I am back. So this right here, we're going to be discussing kind of the, as you know, Nate kindly found this graphic, the 4-legged stool. The 4 partners in this, because it's not just one of us who's kind of pushing and trying to make things safer. It takes a group effort here. First, they're the project sponsors, MRPC, as you've heard, as well as MART, the transit agency. They're managing us there, and you know, they're the ones really leading the process. They're the ones who will be applying for further federal monies and submitting the federal documents, and they own this regional safety action plan when this is all done. Then there's something, the second thing, called the VZAC, which is basically our steering committee, the project steering committee and advisory committee. And they're helping inform us as well. We periodically meet with them to get their input on things and work through a number of details with them, make sure we're getting things. Then there's us, the consultants. You've met Nate already. You will meet some more folks. We're doing a lot of technical analysis. We're preparing all the documentation for the project sponsors. And then there's you, the public, because you're the ones who actually are living here and are engaged in this every day. And you help give us a reality check. We look at data, we look at drawings, we gather data, we gather impressions, but you know, there are things that we miss and can miss, and we need to hear from you and to have you actively participate in this so that we get the best sort of plan that we have. And again, to kind of tell us what we're not getting and where we need to improve. So you're probably wondering, what is this Safe Streets for All, the SS4A? What is this Vision Zero thing? I'm glad. So the SS4A, Safe Streets for All, is a federal program that is funded through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, which is also known as just the bill. That's the acronym. This is also known as the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And it's really a commitment to providing better and safer infrastructure for all modes, whether it's bike, pedestrian, transit, auto, at the local level. And I can't stress that enough. This is a grant that is not designed to help out, say, limited access facilities, you know, major state roads, freeways. It's about improving local roads and facilities, the ones you take every day, although I do know people that do take limited access roads every day. It's designed for municipalities and RPAs and MPOs, not big state DOTs. That's kind of an important thing to kind of grasp here. And it's a 3-phase process. We're in phase 1 there. We're developing this comprehensive regional safety action plan. Then there's a second round where we help the project sponsors, MART and MRPC, in coming up with a list of prioritized projects. And we, you know, move forward and make application to get funding to do further planning, to move further into the design phase, to hear more feedback from you and to refine it. And finally, there's an implementation phase. And that's, again, after we complete the design, we kind of will then move into the implementation phase. We're only in phase one here. But, with this sort of grant, there's also other secondary benefits that DOT is focusing on. One is equity, and there's lots of different definitions of equity out there. We're going to try to grab the broadest view possible. We know, at least from our data and from our experience around the globe, that disadvantaged and vulnerable communities are overrepresented in fatalities and serious injuries. We know that equity gets defined differently, as I kind of said. At a federal, there are federal guidelines. You've heard environmental justice community, as a term. There's a federal standard, there's a state standard, there are often MPO standards, there are often local standards. Again, we're gonna leave ourselves open to hearing the most. And we also plan on considering other sorts of things, like geographic equity, because we know that, although perhaps populations are centered in this region in certain communities, we want to hear from everyone. And, just because somebody has not as much population or density in one area doesn't mean that, there's not a severe safety issue there, as well as other things. But, there's also users that we didn't capture, usually capture or don't come to my mind. And for this, I want to give an example. We've already heard from people who say, what you need to do, and this may seem, again, like something I never would have thought of. You need to consider equestrian users. You need to consider people who walk with their pets. We think about pedestrians. That doesn't pop in my head when I'm thinking about designing something. This is something that is important to the region. We want, there's a substantial amount of people who engage in this. We want to accommodate them. We want to make sure they're safe. That's what we kind of mean by equity. And again, this is also focusing on, correcting this lack of, shall we say, multimodal facilities, such as pedestrian and bicycle facilities. And it's very interesting because, as you'll hear from the survey, there's a nice chunk of people, over 40% of people who currently drive said, what? If there were good bike and pedestrian facilities, I'd rather be doing that. That's how I would want to travel. If there were stuff like that and it was safe, I would do that. That's phenomenal that such a large portion of people said, yeah, I don't need to drive. I'd rather do that. Again, that of course, once you get people out of their cars, that helps out climate change because there's less vehicle emissions, there's less greenhouse gas emissions. You're talking MOCHIP, though, it's another goal behind this. So here we kind of come to as something, as I'll call it, the cheese wheel. This is kind of describing the Vision Zero process. There's several different elements to this that we're going to go through. But again, as you can see, it's not just one sort of bit of safety that this program is founded upon. It's a whole kind of holistic way. And really, to kind of hone in on that first point there, this is a reorientation of how we think about roadway safety. It's very different than kind of, I would say, the traditional sort of way we always have, kind of thought about this sort of thing. And interestingly enough, some of the folks, as Brian had mentioned, WSB has been doing this stuff around the US. Some of our folks actually internationally were among the first practitioners of this in Scandinavia, believe it or not. This is again, this reorientation. It's not about preventing all crashes. It's about preventing the worst of them. It's about getting rid of fatalities and serious injuries and correcting for those. It's not about modifying behavior and hoping people are going to be perfect and never make errors. It's really about designing a system that can accommodate human error and lessen the consequences of mistakes. It's about preventing lives from being turned upside down, because as you'll hear later, there is a very high sort of unfortunately killed in serious injury rate here, much higher than the state average in the Montechusett region. And we want to change that. It's about focusing on these gravest issues. It's about, making people safe, meaning eliminating, the serious injuries and the fatalities. And it's not about blaming individuals. It's about setting up this big overall system. And it's also kind of it's a diagnostic way of looking at it and being proactive. We're going to look at the data. We're going to see where the hotspots are now, so to speak, to kind of use a phrase there. We'll identify where the worst crash locations are in the region by sifting through a whole bunch of data. And we're going to use that data to help us inform what we're going to do in the future, to help us proactively kind of prevent and mitigate crashes in the future at locations in the region, which may not have shown up in the data currently because of one reason or another, or any number of reasons, but which have similar characteristics to other places that do have a lot of crashes and do currently see that serious injuries and fatalities. And it's one of these, okay, we will fix it here and this problem here where we've identified it, as well as in every other location around the region where something could potentially happen, because we know that's kind of where it is at the moment. Now we're back to cheese again. Sorry, this is the Swiss cheese sort of thing here. This is about building redundancy into the system. That safety means there are several different layers here. This is about you're reducing risk by not just fixing infrastructure, but also by lowering speeds, by having vehicles become safer, by getting people to drive more safely, by also setting up some post-crash care to kind of reduce the injury severity, padding consequences as the case may be. And you're probably saying, well, how do we know this works? Well, we actually do have data on this. It's a little dated. It's pre-pandemic, but as you can see here, in places that have implemented them, and yes, I know, here we are in the US all the way on the right, but even so, there's still about 6% reduction in fatalities and serious injuries. But as you look, you can see that, even Australia, which isn't exactly Northern Europe, say like the other four on the end, shall we say, shows this. And there's even some new statistics. In an even shorter period of time, Poland, which is maybe in Northern Europe, but it's definitely probably not, when you think of the Netherlands and Sweden and Norway and their orientation, Poland is a very different sort of country. Poland has, in the last 10 years, I believe, cut their killed, their fatalities and serious injuries by 50%. That's huge because of this program and because of the way they've reoriented their roadways and various safety measures. That's pretty enormous. And we do know, we do realize very much so that we need to develop something that fits this region, right? What's going to work in Scandinavia, it's not going to work here. We know that, we have these general principles, but really we have to deliver something super specific to you folks for this region to meet the needs that are here. Because it's, although we have generalizable sort of principles behind Vision Zero, and, it's not a one size fits all, shall we say. So what are our overarching goals of this study? Well, again, we're going to tackle all the safety, or at least try to tackle, using data. And we're gathering data from engaging, having meetings like this, as well as various stakeholder inputs, soliciting that, looking at different equity considerations. We're doing literature review, finding the best practices from the US and around the country. We're actually also, I can say this, we actually are doing a kind of a study with one of your sister regions, the Lowell region, Northern Middlesex Council of Government, which you abut. We know there's a lot of kind of similarity and overlap there. So we're using various lessons from all these other places to help inform what's going on here. And as I mentioned before, we're just in part one of this program here. I mean, this is, this part one is going to last for another 15 months after this, roughly. But we're going to prep for the next couple of cycles. We're going to prep for that further design work and the further strategizing and supplemental planning, and then into the implementation. And we're going to, again, come up with a prioritized list to target the worst of the worst, so that we get rid of the fatalities and the serious injury crashes, and we ensure that various communities here do get are treated equitably in this process, get their due, shall we say, and are just as safe as everybody else, in terms of the things that we look at, if not more, shall we say. Now, again, you're saying, well, what does this mean? What are you doing? Well, first, again, kind of the overarching sort of arc of the project is, first, where we had worked with the VZAC to talk about shared values and goals. Those of you who took the survey will notice that those were on the survey, and you were asked to rank them. And some of the goals, which, if you kind of look over on the right, is about where's this going? What's our overall goal? Typically, MPO set a goal of, we want to reduce fatalities and serious injuries either to zero or by a certain percentage by a certain date. And that's kind of a sample on the right there, as you can see that chart trending downward. Ultimately, that's what we're kind of asking. But let's setting that goal, or thinking about setting that goal, and then figuring out, how do we get there? What sort of strategies are we going to use for that? And what sorts of projects are we going to get there? So we'll look at some strategies, we'll come up with some projects. We're going to prioritize projects. We're going to help MRPC prioritize, and MART prioritize this list of projects, so that we do target the worst and most serious crash locations. And we're going to help set up ways to implement these sort of things, and keep the ball rolling, shall we say, as well as to set up a monitoring and evaluation, right? We want to be able to know, after we come up with these wonderful designs, and we're several grand cycles in the future and these things get built, how do we know if they're working? We're going to set up evaluative sort of criteria and a monitoring schedule. And we're going to, make sure, because again, this is your plan, your community's plan here. MRPC is going to own this and implement this. And, ultimately, we're going to help them figure out a way to monitor it, evaluate it, and make sure it continues to work. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to Nate, who's going to talk about the survey and what other sort of input that he's heard, or we've heard from you all. Take it away, Nate.
Thank you so much, Bruce. So unfortunately, now that I've been reminded that I'm hungry and there's cheese, I do not have any Triscuits or Beaujolais to share with you. But I do have survey results, and this is the sample from the MRPC MART Safety Action Plan survey. So it did run for a pretty good long time, from the middle of March to the beginning of this month. We did have 238 responses, although there were no mandated questions, so that if you were to look at the data, you wouldn't see every single question, or perhaps any of them for that matter, adding up to a total of 238. But why did we do this? We really wanted to hear your concerns, your lived experiences, and your priorities, right? This is about, as Bruce said, not letting us as professionals, as consultants, get lost in kind of our own models and, oh boy, wouldn't it be great, without being grounded in what you who live here every day understand the region to be. So if you look to the left side of the screen, you will see the guiding principles adopted by our Vision Zero Action Committee, right? So the concept of no user left behind. Equity, not equality, right? The idea that we're tailoring what we're giving to each user to their needs, rather than giving everybody the exact same thing. preserving community livability while allowing for appropriate commercial mobility, making things data-driven, not just about, well, I heard from my aunt that there's a bad intersection. Making it about education, not just design. Getting broad buy-in and accountability. That's why we do things like the survey. We want your buy-in. And the time is of the essence, right? People are getting hurt. So we need to do something. So we asked folks on the survey to prioritize these with us. And one of the things that was very interesting is these ties, which I have not seen. We've done a couple of these. We mentioned, the sister region, the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. There were no ties with them. So this isn't necessarily ironclad. It shouldn't be, this is exactly how we're going to do things, but it does give us some sense as we look at the future and we start to think about, okay, if this project and this project are kind of being weighed, we're going to think about these guiding principles. So livability and mobility, right? Preserving community livability while allowing for appropriate commercial mobility. That came in number 1. Coming in at number 2 is a tie, no user left behind, being data-driven and not anecdotal. Right at the middle of the pack, 3, time is of the essence. Then some more ties, equity, not equality, broad buy-in and accountability, education, not just design. And then I found this very interesting because part of what we did with this was actually to export and read pretty much all of the written comments that people wrote. And this may just be what happens when people are forced to rank things. It may be what happens when 238 people take a survey of X number of questions, but context-sensitive solutions, meaning that the solutions we pick should fit the communities into which they're installed, it came in at the very end. But then if you read the comments, it's still very important to people. So I think we should just, take those two things together and say these rankings aren't absolute. It's one ingredient among many. So we looked at, where did people leave comments? And, there were a number of different types of comment pin. Far and away, the 2 that people selected most were dangerous intersection and dangerous road segment. And as the public involvement guy, this is an exercise that I always really like to go through. For those of you who wear glasses, or have seen a movie where there are people wearing glasses and they go to the optometrist and they're sitting in the chair and they got their head stuck in that big bulky machine, which probably has a technical name that I do not know. But they're sitting there and the optometrist is dropping the shades in front of their eyes. They're saying number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And suddenly the picture comes into focus for them. They got the perfect pair of glasses. What we like to do is we like to get the community's understanding of where did they see the danger spots. And then we line that up with where our engineers see the danger spots. And for me, I want to see those 2 things coming into pretty sharp relief together. Because that, for me, I'd say, okay, when people are living it, they're seeing it the same way that we're seeing it when we're digesting it as part of that data-driven, not anecdotal, kind of broad-based approach to it. And so you're going to see some maps later that line up with this beautifully. And I really was very pleased when I saw it. So just a couple of hot spots that you will see on the maps. Ayer, the intersections of Main Street and Mill Street, West Street and Depot Street. Groton, Harvard Road and Central Avenue intersection. Fitchburg, Luna Street and Townsend Street intersection. Water Street and Wansnoosic Road, Bemis Road intersection. Hubbardston, Worcester Road and Brigham Street intersection area. Westminster, area around the entrance and exit ramps to 92 on Route 2. Westminster was interesting to me just because one of the things we've heard about from the Vision Zero Action Committee, as well as some of the staff at MRPC, is that the transition between urban and rural in this region can be very abrupt. And we've also heard a lot of concern from the folks in Greater Lowell that the space where you're transitioning from a limited access highway to local roads is a spot where everybody feels like what am I doing here? As Bruce said, this is not about those limited access highways, but the space where a limited access highway meets a local road is a different matter. So we asked people, what are your travel choices? And, kind of ask them to their parting thoughts, what's the most important thing to you? And this was something that Bruce alluded to earlier. So for those folks who chose to answer this question, 106 of them, the majority travel by car. Of those, 39% are happy to stay behind the wheel. This is kind of interesting. 27% would rather walk. Normally, we see cycle and transit as kind of rising above that, but it's 27% that would rather walk. And I want you to hold on to that figure for a moment, because it's going to come up in the key themes. You can see 16%, another tie, 16% would rather cycle, same as would rather take transit. Key comment themes, what's important to you? Poor road conditions, both urban and rural, came up time and again in the comments. This idea that people are swerving to avoid potholes, it's bringing them into the path of other vehicles. It's bringing them into the path of bicyclists. The way Siri brought me into town did have some lumps. Winding and narrow roads with limited visibility. That came up a lot. Concern about trucks, specifically around warehouse facilities. And then remember, I asked you to keep that 27% of people who would like to walk in mind. A lack of pedestrian infrastructure, sidewalks, crosswalks, rectangular rapidly flashing beacons, or RRFBs. That's one of those devices where the pedestrian presses the button and it illuminates on either side of the crosswalk and flashes to tell drivers there's somebody coming. So I look at that 27%, and I look at narrow winding roads, limited visibility, and a lack of pedestrian infrastructure, and I do see an interesting opportunity. A lot of discussion about what's the character of Route 2A. Is that a local road? Is it a highway? And then remember I said the piece about, well, context sensitive came in at the bottom. Well, solutions need to fit the environment. So again, one ingredient among many. We also wanted to just kind of show you where folks lived. We asked people to give us their home zip code. For the purposes of tonight, we converted those zip codes over into town names. But among those who chose to answer the question, the heavy hitters, so we had 31 respondents from Ayer, 21 from Fitchburg, 16 from Hubbardston, 11 from Townsend, 4 from Leominster, and really after that, it drops off into the single digits. Although interestingly, 1 from Waltham, Massachusetts, and which is most definitely not part of the region, and then 1 from Milford, New Hampshire, which again is not part of the region, but we're glad to have their input. I was talking this over with Bruce, and I said, look, just because someone lives outside the region doesn't mean they're not commuting across it or to it on a daily basis. So again, that input is nonetheless valid. So at this point, I think I would like to invite Zach up to the microphone to talk through some of the initial crash data analysis. And the good news is you've had, unless there are questions for me, that's it with me and my terrible jokes. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Nate. Good evening, everyone. My name is Zach Gavel. I'm one of the technical folks with WSP. I'm going to walk through a little bit of our initial crash analysis, and I'll caveat this by saying this is the precursor to a more in-depth analysis that the team is going to be doing that we will bring back out to the public in future meetings, and there'll be more opportunities to discuss there. This is just to give an overview of what the trends are across the region right now, so that you have a sense of where we're going and sort of why we're here right now. So I'll start just by talking about, typically when we do projects like this, we look at 5 years worth of crash data. You go too far further back from there, it's too distant and the road characteristics and travel patterns might have changed. You do something that's more narrow than that, and suddenly you're looking at a situation where you're just capturing a really narrow snapshot in time. So we looked at January 2019 through December of 2023. Notably, everyone knows that the pandemic happened in the middle of that time. People's travel behavior changed at that time. Roadways did not necessarily get safer during that time. So there is a lot of interesting data that we can still glean from the pandemic period, and that's why we have not discounted that time period. There were over 4,000 crashes over those 5 years across the region that resulted in at least one injury. And then over 450 crashes that resulted in either a fatal or a serious injury. And those are those crashes that we're really focused on. That means once every 4 days, someone in the region is having that fatal or serious injury impact. So if you think back to what you were doing this long weekend, in that period of time, someone in this region has either died as a result of roadway violence or has been seriously injured. So it's a trend that we really are seeing across the country right now that we're trying to wrap our hands around and think about what are the solutions to this problem. Of those 52, of those over 450 crashes, 52 of those were fatal. So that's about 10 every year across the region, but it's only about 0.5% of all of the total crashes that we're seeing in the region. So it is a small share of the overall crashes, but the impact, as you can imagine, is very severe. Just to talk about where these incidents are happening. Over 80% of them are happening on two-way undivided roadways. Those are your typical roads throughout the region. And just to note, we are not looking at any crashes that occurred on limited access roadways. So all of those statistics were just from local roads in the region. It's not from Route 2, it's not from 495, it's not from Route 190. It's just from those local roads that you're seeing and traveling every day. And we're dividing those crashes into happening either along corridors or at intersections. So of the incidents that are happening at intersections, a lot of those are happening at intersections that don't have formal controls, meaning no stop sign, no traffic signals, sort of roadway anarchy, if you will. But that's not to say that those intersections that have stop signs or signals are faring that much better. They are also accounting for a significant portion of where we're seeing those incidents happen. The vast majority of the collisions that we're seeing are vehicles hitting other vehicles or objects, which typically makes sense. If you're thinking about this from a purely kinetic energy perspective, when two objects are colliding, that is the force that is causing those fatal and serious injuries. Unfortunately, 15% of these collisions are involving what we call vulnerable roadway users. So those are folks that are walking, biking, on horseback, using micromobility devices like electric scooters, in wheelchairs. Those are the folks that we're classifying as vulnerable roadway users. And those are split out in the slide. You can see the pedestrian numbers and the cyclist numbers as well. And those folks make up a really small percentage of the overall commuting public in the MRPC region, but they are disproportionately impacted among these collisions. So what I'm going to try and emphasize is that we're not talking about just one group of users when we're doing this plan. We're trying to focus on everyone who's using the roadways across the region, whether they're biking, walking, in a car, in public transit, however they might get around. You know, you are the focus of this plan if you are on the roads. We're trying to make the roads safer for everyone. There are also some behavioral trends that you might recognize as common things that you hear about when you think about roadway safety. Things like impaired driving, that accounts for about 10% of the KSI crashes, the fatal and serious injury crashes in the region. 25% of those collisions are also involving people that are not using or improperly using seatbelts. So, you know, those are two very, I would say basic, but two very straightforward safety measures that, you know, not drinking and driving, using your seatbelt, that we hear a lot about on the behavioral side, but they are impacting some of the collisions that we're seeing across the region. And we are also noticing that this trend is impacting different age groups differently across the region. Younger adults between 20 and 34 account for about 1/3 of the folks that are either fatal or seriously injured in the region. But that's not to say that folks that are older are not impacted as well. They're accounting for about 1/5 of those, of the overall population that is fatally or seriously injured in a collision. So this is really, again, a story of all roadway users across the region and across a variety of different demographic groups. So what I am going to do is just quickly walk through a few maps. We've tried to lay out geographically where these collisions are occurring across the region so that you have a sense of where the hotspots are. I think what's notable here, and you're looking at a map of all the fatal and the serious injury crashes across the region right now, is that there is no community that is left out of this, aside from, I think, 2, if I'm counting correctly. There are collisions that are resulting in a fatality or a serious injury across the past 5 years in all of the MRPC communities. So this is not a story of just Fitchburg and Leominster. This is not a story of rural versus urban. This is a story of the entire region having an opportunity here to work on getting rid of these crashes. And that's part of why we're doing this plan. I spoke a little bit earlier about vulnerable roadway users. Those crashes are a little bit more concentrated in the urban centers throughout the region, specifically in Fitchburg, Leominster, and Gardner. But that is not to say that there are not collisions involving vulnerable roadway users throughout the entire region. I'll point you to Harvard, which is a smaller, more rural community that has a number of vulnerable roadway user collisions in it. So this is, again, not a story of one versus the other, us versus them, but really an opportunity to think about how can we make roadways safer for everyone was the previous map. Now thinking about the folks that might be more vulnerable as they're navigating the roadway throughout the entire region. And then I'll quickly breeze through these next two because they're just subsets of that previous map that you just saw, focusing just here on pedestrians. Again, you'll see a cluster of collisions in Fitchburg and Leominster involving pedestrians as well as Gardner. That makes sense. Those are communities where we see less folks that have access to vehicles regularly. They're more dense, things are closer together, so it might be more appropriate to be walking from place to place. Unfortunately, that is also the characteristics that often drive high levels of pedestrian collisions. And then cyclists, you'll see these are a little bit more sparse throughout the region. This is a trend that we see just about anywhere that we do this analysis. Oftentimes cyclists, there's two different types of cyclist collisions that we typically see. There's folks that are cycling as a means of getting from place to place. That's their primary way of commuting. And then there's folks that are cycling recreationally. I think you'll see that there's different pockets of each of those types of cyclists throughout the region. And as a result, you sort of see cyclist collisions be spread out throughout the region pretty broadly. And then we heard from folks early on in this process that they were interested in understanding more about heavy vehicles, trucks in particular, and how trucks were navigating the roadway and how what safety impacts having heavy vehicles in communities was having on the region. And so what we found was that while there are a number of collisions that are involving heavy vehicles throughout the region, they are disproportionately located on NHS roads, which are roads where are designated for trucks to travel on. And so we are seeing, yes, that those routes are having some hotspots of truck collisions, but they're not disproportionately creeping out off of those roads into other parts of the community. So this is a place where there are specific things that we can do to make roadways safer for trucks and for heavy vehicles and for other roadway users that might be interacting with them. But given that we have some clear hotspots here, we can target those countermeasures and those interventions to specific regions. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Han Bao, who's going to walk through a little bit of where we're going from here.
Hi, good evening. My name is Han Bao. I'm going to talk about our next step in our data process. So Zach has led us through some initial findings of the crash data. Our next step would be take all the findings of those and then convert it into something that we can actually take action on. That is a roadway network. So we are building a high injury network out of the past 5-year history data trend, crash data trend. So what is a high injury network? As shown in this wonderful example from a similar study, the high injury network shows where high frequency and density of the crashes happens. It shows different tiers of the roadway network based on how dangerous they are. And it takes in consideration both killed and serious injuries, crashes, as well as minor injury crashes. So if it's a killed or serious injury crash, it gets on the news, everyone pay attention to it, it's something that's serious. But if it's a series of minor injuries that all happens in the one location or a similar location, that also might be something that's worth checking on. So in order to do that, we're developing a weighting system that gives scores to all the crashes based on their severity. and then take a total score for the roadway segments. The roadway segment, the roadway scores are then processed with a rolling average model to smooth them out. So instead of seeing a couple of hotspots, that doesn't really mean anything like technically, you will see corridors that we can actually make studies and dive deeper into like actual projects. So here's the weighting system that we're going to be using for the high injury network. We are giving the weighting system we came up collaboratively with MRPC and our action committee. Some more severe crashes are weighted more heavily than less severe ones. And the property-only crashes are not included in the high injury network. With that, I'll give back to Bruce to talk about next steps.
Thanks, Han. So yes, the question is, what are we doing after this? Because we've just begun. We have much more to do on this study. Over the summer, we're going to refine some of the analysis. We're going to apply those weights. We're going to create that higher injury network. And we're going to do further digging, further analysis. And we're going to generate this thing that we call the high-risk network, this predictive tool. Where could future sort of similar hotspots be located? And, we're going to have to really dig deep on that in trying to figure out what are these characteristics. And I think it's really great that the survey, people have identified these things. And we're going to have to see how those sort of, compound things, if at where the intersections currently are, is it in a place of transition between a limited access highway and a local road? Is it a place with windy, curvy, geometry? Is it a place where there aren't pedestrian or bicycle facilities? And then, kind of cascading down, is it an unsignalized intersection? Is it a place that doesn't have the push button beacon? Is it a place where, the speed limit changes? Shall we say, as folks have pointed out, kind of the uncertain characteristic of some of the roads that, it's you're down at 25 miles an hour and then you go a couple blocks and you're back up to 40, 50 miles an hour. And as you can imagine, that increased speed is increased risk for injury. As well as limited visibility. These are things we're going to be taking into consideration. Probably, use a lot of shoe leather getting out there, taking a look at certain things of, okay, well, this is an area that perhaps, there's certain, again, other roadway characteristics, whether this area is prone to more potholes and people need to swerve. We'll investigate those because, again, your feedback is extremely valuable in this. And we're going to, review all the sort of stuff with our project sponsors, as well as the steering committee, the Vision Zero Action Committee. Upcoming in the fall, we're going to have another one of these public information meetings that we're going to present these sort of findings at, this further analysis. And we're going to conduct the equity analysis, very important across the region. And we're going to begin to think about how we're going to prioritize some projects and just even also about some, policy ideas and, overarching sort of things of, what we found and what sort of countermeasures do we think we can employ to make this place safer. So with that, I think we're at the end of, our formal presentation, and we'd love to hear from folks in the audience, whether remote or virtual, or excuse me, whether in person or remote. So, Nate, would you like to?
Yeah, I was going to say I can hop in there and drive if you like.
Yep, sure.
I mean, Grant, if there's anything that,
No, but people can certainly answer any questions they have in the Q&A.
or if people would like to raise your hand, you're more than welcome to do that at this time. Yes, Ryan.
I think I solved my audio problems. Can you hear me?
I certainly can, Brian. It's nice to hear your voice. What can we do for you, sir?
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for all the info that you put out here. In I saw that air was one of the highest respondents in the group. So I noticed that there were two areas in one of the slides in air that had the most level of concern. Can you just clarify, was that from the respondents or from study, any type of other study?
No, if you saw a map, that was generated by looking at actual data. So there were two sets of sort of responses. So when you saw a slide that had intersections laid out as just described with words, those are places that we found in the survey. But when you saw those maps, those were generated by going back through actual crash histories that were taken down and put into a state portal that can be accessed by our engineers, and they run through it. They generate those maps. So as I said, what we were happy to see, at least on the outreach side, was, hey, look, folks in air think they've got a problem. The data suggests, yep, they have a problem. What we don't want to see is a condition where everybody in air says, it's great. Why are you looking at us? And the data says, ugly. So, but the maps you saw, those are based on real numbers.
Got it. No, I appreciate the explanation. Thank you.
Pleasure. They don't all go at once now, folks. You'll overwhelm us.
Ryan Gilbeck.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. So next steps. Looking forward. From the municipal level, what is the will you be contacting the municipalities? Like how does the further outreach happen? I know that we had the survey, but moving forward, will there be any official contact with, say, air?
So that's a very good question for the sort of forward steps. I think I'll exactly how we would go about that. I mean, so I can tell you what we would do from the outreach perspective. Any place that we visited for flyering and contact for about a public meeting, we would go back to. So I believe actually air was one of the places that carried our meeting advertisements. And I know we visited places in air for the flyer campaign. In terms of what sort of official, like government to government or, agency contacts would take place, I would want Brian to speak to that if he's, willing to, come down. And Bruce, if there's a, sort of, I know some of the other ones we've done, there's been a mechanism for that. So if you'd want to speak to that, I'll yield back the balance of my time, as the phrase goes. Brian.
Sure. Typically, we try to include information on public outreach and this plan in particular on all of our normal groups. We have the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the commission meetings, our typical contacts in the transportation realm, our Joint Transportation Committee. We've also been pushing out the information to a number of communities through their town clerks and typical posting type of practices. Certainly, we're always willing to take advice on other areas where it might be helpful to have the information, and always willing to come out and talk about the plan and what's going on with it at any meeting of interest.
Thanks, Brian. I would like to add to that. One, we still have the project website, which is active, and there is room for comment on that, correct?
This presentation will go to
This
that.
presentation goes there, as well as the VSAC committee, the steering committee. Every community was invited. I think most communities, if not all, have formal representation on them. That's another way to kind of, I would say, get, get your voice heard and get information to kind of get, use that as a channel. And again, you can, barring that, or the way that Brian has said, you can reach out via the website, and pose questions there, or say, hey, this is this and this and this I noticed. Okay, well, we can investigate that. So thank you, Brian.
Janet or Catherine, Janet, I know you're a member of the VZAC. If you'd like to, just make any remarks in that capacity. Don't want to put you on the spot, and Catherine, certainly since you're here, be more than happy to hear from you since you sat through the whole presentation. But you don't have to. We were joined tonight by a member of the Fitchburg Fire Department. Sir, if there's any remarks you'd like to offer, because I think we may be coming to the end of this, much as I enjoy everybody's company.
Gather everything, put it together.
All right, very good, sir. We appreciate your being here. All right, well, if nobody has anything further, Brian, do you want to wrap it up, or are you comfortable with me wrapping it up?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It was very kind of the folks at Fitchburg State to host us. I am going to stop the recording at this time. I am going to turn off the webinar,